Using a 19mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our lug nuts. Go ahead and set those aside. Remove the wheel, set that aside. I want to go ahead and remove our T30 Torx screw that goes through our brake rotor into our wheel hub. To prevent this from rolling, I'm going to go ahead and use a small pry tool, put it up into the vanes of the brake rotor itself. That'll keep the rotor from spinning while we try to loosen this. Your vehicle may or may not have this screw. It is not important to the operation of the brakes. It is simply put there to hold the rotor in place during the assembly line process. I'll go ahead and set that aside. And on the back side of a brake caliper, you want to remove this 13mm bolt here and this one up top. Set those bolts aside. And use our pry bar. And we just want to go ahead and work our caliper off. And before this fully comes off, you want to pay attention and make sure that you have some sort of support tool or hanging tool, strap, hook, or something of that fashion. That way there we can go ahead, remove our caliper, and we want to hang this up and out of the way. That way there we don't have any extra pressure on our flex hose here for our brake line. I'm going to go ahead and remove our brake pads. Using a 15mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our two caliper bracket bolts. When you remove the second bolt, the caliper bracket will be loose, so be careful not to drop that. At this point here, you can go ahead and grab your brake rotor and just slide that off the front of the wheel hub. Using a 34mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our CV axle or spindle nut. Go ahead and set that aside. I want to go ahead and remove our wheel hub. In order to do so, there's going to be 3 studs going through the back side of the knuckle into our wheel hub. There's one here, there's one at 12 o'clock up at the top center, and then on the other side, and they're set up in a triangular pattern. Using a 13mm socket, an extension with our ratchet, let's go ahead and loosen those. Now we're not going to remove these bolts all the way. We're going to remove these roughly about halfway out of the wheel hub itself. So once that stud is recessed and about halfway, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next bolt. We'll get that loose. And we're going to do this for all 3. Now what we're going to do is go to the other side of the vehicle, and we can go ahead and rotate that wheel. That's going to allow us to get behind that wheel bearing a little bit easier to go ahead and loosen that bolt. On the back side of our knuckle, we have our ABS connector right here. We're just going to release this from the tab. On the back side of the connector, we have a little spring tab right here. Just pull that out, and we're going to separate the 2 connectors like so. So we're going to go ahead and start tapping on the perimeter of the hub itself. We have our 3 studs still installed. They're roughly about a third of the way threaded into the hub, and those are there just to keep the hub from popping out and falling on the ground. So once we get this loose all the way around, we'll go ahead and remove the studs the rest of the way and remove the bearing. Now our bearing has a pretty good sized gap between the hub bearing and the knuckle itself. We're going to go ahead and remove those bolts from the back. Okay, get one removed. Let's go ahead and remove the other two. Let's give our hub a few more taps here. We'll go ahead and tap on our axle end here just to make sure that that is loose. Now when we remove this here, our backing plate is going to come off as well. Go ahead and separate that from the axle. We'll go ahead and work our sensor out in the back here. Using an 18mm deep socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our nut from our tie rod end. Now we have the tie rod end nut loose. Let's remove that and push that aside. I'm going to go ahead and remove our strut to knuckle bolts using a 21mm socket. Use an 18mm wrench on this side to hold the bolt. At this point here, we can go ahead and work the knuckle free from the strut. If you have to, you can go ahead and put a small pry bar inside there, but we're able to pop ours out. Now on the bottom ball joint here, I'm going to go ahead and remove our cotter pin. Using an 18mm swivel socket, I'm going to go ahead and remove the nut on our lower ball joint here. I want to go ahead and pull our CV axle out of our knuckle. Just rotate that out, pop that off to the side. At this point here, we're going to strike our knuckle right here, and that should release our lower ball joint from the knuckle. Let's go ahead and take our knuckle. I'm going to slide this over our lower ball joint here. Let's go ahead and install our nut. You're just going to get that on there and throw that down as far as you can by hand. Let's go ahead and tighten down our castle nut on our lower ball joint. Now we're going to go ahead and torque this down. You want to do 15 foot-pounds plus 120 degrees. Now when doing this here, you want to make sure that the hole in the ball joint lines up with a notch in your castle nut here. Once you have that lining up, I want to go ahead and feed that through. In our case here, our notch lines up with the back side of the knuckle. Makes it a little bit more challenging to get to, but you want to make sure you can grab that cotter pin and bend that back over. Just want one of those tabs to come over. The other one we're going to snip off. Let's go ahead and spin this around. Fit our CV axle through. Let's go ahead and get that lined up on our strut itself. We're going to use as a screwdriver here. You can use a pry tool. What you want to do is we're going to try and catch the hole in our knuckle, line it up with our strut, and then we'll feed a bolt through the other side here. Once those bolts are through, get to install the nuts and just zip those on. Let's go ahead and tighten these nuts down. You want to go ahead and torque these two bolts down to 96 foot-pounds. We're going to take our backing plate, make sure that the open notch is facing the front for our brakes. Don't forget to feed your ABS wire through. You want your ABS wire to be facing on the top on this side here. Feed your ABS wire through the knuckle while you work the hub onto the splines for the axle. Now we did put some anti-seize compound on the back of the hub, put some grease on the splines of the axle. And once we get this lined up, at this point here, we're going to go ahead and install our 3 wheel hub bolts. Now you do want to go ahead and get replacement bolts from the factory. To go ahead and do this for recording purposes, we're just going to use our original bolts. We did put some Loctite on those bolts. Going to feed that through, feed it through our backing plate, and we're going to try and get one of these bolts started in the hub. Once you get one of these bolts started, you can go around and get the other 2 bolts threaded in as well. Once we get all 3 of those bolts started, we can go ahead and snug those down. Those bolts will pull that hub into the knuckle. While we're here, we can go ahead and install our ABS connector. Just line that up. Snap that into place. Make sure that it is clipped in. And we can install our little retainer clip there. Let's go ahead and torque down our hub bolts at 96 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and repeat for the other 2 bolts. I'm going to go ahead, take your tie rod end, drop that down inside the knuckle, Go ahead and get that nut on. Now I want to go ahead and tighten down this nut to 22 foot-pounds plus 120 degrees, if you have the ability to do so. Now another 120 degrees is a little bit more than a quarter of a turn. Let's go ahead and install our wheel. I'm going to start all of our lug nuts and get those threaded on by hand first. Once all these are on, I'm going to go ahead and get those snugged down. And torque down our wheels to 100 foot-pounds. Now that we have your wheels torqued, you want to go ahead and bring your vehicle down to your local alignment shop and get that taken care of so you don't have premature tire wear.